Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Authors Bantering. And this week we're going to be talking about probably the heaviest topic to discuss in writing, which is when do you quit? When should somebody give up on their dreams? When should you throw in the towel? This is obviously going to be a very subjective thing. Everybody's a little bit different, but I think it's a topic that needs to be brought up. I think a lot of people get into this without really having some sort of timetable or exit strategy. And so I'm just going to collaborate here with Ian a little bit and just kind of bounce back and forth. I guess with you, Ian. So, have you ever considered this? Right? Has the thought of stopping ever entered your mind, or did you go into this business with an idea of of what you had for a timetable to accomplish your goals?
No, that's and again, this is such a big question. So I want to try and jump onto the first part of the question first, which was, have I ever considered quitting? And the answer is yes. And I think it's very important for any writer or creative person to consider quitting, and to ask themselves very honestly, look in that mirror and say, okay, do I still want to be writing? Do I still want to be doing the creative work that I am doing? Is this still important enough to me to be spending however much time of my life that I'm spending on it now and will be spending in the future? I think it's really important to ask that question.
Okay.
The reason it's important is because a lot of people don't ask themselves that question. And a lot of people just kind of continue on autopilot, or maybe because they're scared of what would happen if they did quit, or if they admitted to themselves that they wanted to quit. Maybe they built up writing in their minds, or they've made promises to people, or even promises to themselves that they kept long after the writing stopped being fun and interesting to them
Yeah.
anymore. And I personally know writers like this, or who are in some stage of this, where for them, a lot of the feeling is gone, but they are on autopilot. And I think because they have not taken that time to ask themselves this honest question, do I still want to be doing this?
Yep.
So I have asked myself this question. And every time I really, really step back, and again, I get frustrated with writing. I take breaks from writing. I doubt my writing. I lose interest in what I'm working on sometimes. And sometimes I start new projects. But in these moments, like these really, really honest, reflecting moments, when I do ask myself the question, do I want to keep writing? The answer is yes.
Okay.
And I know that because I am honest with myself in that situation. I also know this because there have been times when in my life when I wasn't writing, sometimes for months and months at a time, because of other life stuff got in the way, or I needed to take a break, or maybe I was just frustrated by a project. During those times when I wasn't writing, sometimes I would get very irritable. I would get distracted. I would feel like my life wasn't going anywhere, and I would eventually realize, wait a minute, it's because I'm not writing. It's because I'm not doing this thing that I really, really want to do. So for me, I think that taking those pauses to honestly ask yourself this question, even multiple times a year if necessary, and then two, seeing what happens when you actually don't write and what your life looks like without writing, and then how you feel when you're not writing. I think those can be really good ways to know your situation.
I like that. No, it's a good. That's an interesting way of looking at it. So you view it more from like an emotional standpoint of just am I enjoying this? Am I still enjoying it? If I am, keep going with it. So you don't really have any kind of outcomes that would determine that. Like,
No, this is, and I'm glad you
yeah,
clarified, because you did ask about timetables actually, and I didn't answer the
yeah,
second part of the question. I will say enjoy is maybe too light of a word. I would say fulfilling,
okay,
and not being fulfilled like, oh, I wrote today and I felt good or whatever. I often think about writing as, or building a writing career and publishing books and wanting to develop a career as an author as a journey that I am on.
yep,
And it's the idea that being on the journey, we all know the cliche, it's the journey, not the destination, right? Being on the journey is itself fulfilling.
mm,
And then thinking about the end, or what that author career might look like, is still very exciting to me.
okay,
And again, it's not a laborious chore for me to be working towards this at all. And I do feel fulfilled and energized when I do it. And so that to me is a really, really good indicator. But as far as like setting goals, you and I have talked about this before. Very rarely do I set goals. Okay, I want to do XYZ by a certain point. I want to finish this by the end of the year, or I want to get this prize or get published here or whatever. I am not the kind of person who makes those sort of timetable-esque goals. I'll set goals for myself,
Yep.
but they won't be the type with very strict deadlines. Partly because, when I used to do that when I was younger, it often didn't work. Or I would just not, I was just not realistic with myself about how long it would take to do something or how difficult it was to do something. So eventually I started, again, still thinking about goals, but not being as strict about them. So, I have a lot of goals that I would like to be, or I would like to get to, in the future at some point, near future, medium future, and then more distant future. And I'm always thinking, okay, how can I be moving closer to that goal? Maybe I won't get it tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, but what can I do to be closer to it than I was last week, last month, last year?
Gotcha. Okay, so you got the growth mindset there of just kind of as long as you're making some sort of progress, you're happy. Okay,
Yes.
which
And,
is
and again, that to me, I think prevents me from getting discouraged when I don't meet those goals. But I want to
fair.
hear your opinion on this too, actually, because you did use the word timetable. So I'm
Yeah,
wondering, like, timetables for when you're sorting these kinds of things
I
out?
yeah. So definitely. So when I first started writing, it was in 2014. I gave myself, I said, 10 years minimum to see if I can get published. That's my thing. Like 10 years to get a
Mm.
novel published traditionally, and I was like, after that, you can reassess. So for the first, and I'm on what, year 9 now, right? So going into year 10. So for me, that was the big thing. It was the idea that I had to, I basically could not complain. I could not doubt myself at all for 10 years because I started this back in 2014. Everyone, and even now, people talk about the 10,000 hour rule, the 10-year rule, whatever, right? Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers book was out, right? And everyone was like, you can master anything you want, just got to put the time in, right? So that was what I had said at the time, and I've kept that up to this point. As time's gone on, as I've kind of experienced some of the rockier sides of this, I guess, of this, I've definitely like reflected a bit. There was a time very recently actually where I was thinking like, okay, so like, all right, so you're self-publishing your first novel here. If you can't sell, like, if you can't get an agent for your next one, would you quit, or is this going to be the end? Like, are you going to stop doing it? um, because it requires time, right? Like these novels require a lot of time. It's difficult for me at least to wake up like early in the morning before I work, or even after work, and to get to the page and write if I can't foresee myself getting it out there. Like I can't just wake up, spend 90 minutes writing basically, then go to work for 8 hours and not have the dream sort of thing, right? Don't have that sort of dream or that ambition that this is going to get it. Like this is going to make it.
But when you
If
say get it out
Yeah.
there, do you mean get it out there at some unspecified point in the future or get
Oh,
it out there by such and such a date, going back to this time?
in general. So completely in general. So basically, just get it out there with like I guess traditionally published. So like, in other words, like if I can't find like a publisher for this book, I would probably not be able to get to that keyboard if I did not think it had a chance, at least a good chance. And that's sort of my attitude. And that's why I've kind of done some reassessments. Yeah. But that for me was at least my timetable initially. Now, having gotten kind of as far as I have, which isn't very far, but kind of been inspired by a lot of the setbacks that I've had, right? Like it's very much the element of failing better. The idea that like I've gotten much better rejections. I've got much better send more stuff, send something different. Obviously, I've had kind of like the sort of tentative deal there before with publisher. I've had sort of like a Zoom call with an agent and all that stuff. So I've gotten somewhat farther in the process than I did when I first started. So for me, it's at least it's enough blood in the water to keep me going. Like if you think of it as almost like a shark, right? Like all right, there's a little bit of blood, I can keep going. I think there's a dead whale carcass out there, very
you,
close,
you
right?
can you can see yourself developing
Yeah,
in that sense.
exactly.
Okay, so then, no, this is this is making a lot of sense because I talked a lot about what do I want to be doing and what
Yeah.
fulfills me and what do I want to be doing with my life and what
Mm-hmm.
dreams do I want to be working towards. But for you, it seems like you're more results oriented, not necessarily have a book published or get an agent or sell 10,000 copies or whatever, but is there something that I can latch onto that says, okay, I'm better now than I was last
Yeah.
year or 2 years ago?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm very result, and that's pretty much me exactly because I could stop, like I could quote unquote give up writing, like just be done basically, and still like have something where I tinker with it like 1 day a week basically, like some novel, and take like 3 or 4 years to write it, and then just trunk it or whatever, or self publish or something like that. I could do that, but that to me is not a professional mindset. That to me is not me following my dreams, right? That's just me sort of just being a hobbyist, in a sense. So for me,
So
it
in a way, it
always,
would still be kind of giving up, but not like 100% giving
yeah,
up. It would be
exactly. Like
changing
I
your mindset about writing from, trying to develop a career to still writing and enjoying writing, but doing it as a hobby and not having those longer term ambitions.
exactly. Like that for me would be a form of giving up. Like I would consider that me giving up, to be honest. But yeah, I might still do it. And it's, I think the thing that keeps me going, honestly, like is a little bit of that internal motivation, which is making a clear distinction between what I enjoy and what I don't. Right? Like I still love writing, but in fact, even when I was going through that self doubt period there, I was thinking to myself, okay, what do you enjoy? And I came to the very clear conclusion that I enjoy writing. I still enjoy the process of writing. I don't enjoy the writing business. I don't enjoy the arduous nature of it, the sort of gatekeeping, also. I don't enjoy those elements of it. But I enjoy the actual act of writing, so I should keep going. And that, if you're going to consider stopping, that I think would be probably one of the best things to ask yourself is, are you enjoying writing, or is it just the other aspects of it that you don't enjoy? And if that's the case, I would
Yeah,
probably suggest you keep going.
yeah,
But
I agree with that.
for
I
me,
agree with
that's been it, right? So I very much had a goal of like, all right, minimum 10 years, then reassess. And I would say if you're starting out in this process, you kind of have to think that way. You do have to think long term. The person who gets like 3 years in and decides to quit, well, you were not thinking far enough ahead. Even 5 years, right? Um, and depending upon your age, you may want to really consider even longer, right? Like if you're not even 30,
I think in the
yeah.
grand scheme, 3 years is not a lot of time
Oh,
to be
absolutely.
doing.
But even if
Really don't
someone at
think
like
it is.
18, right, saying I'm going to take 10 years, right, to become published, or I'm going to stop, right? Stopping at 28 is pretty young. Like
Yeah.
most authors don't get published until they're like 35. Like 35, below 35 is young. So at
When I
least, yeah.
just for comparison, so when I was 28, I'd been writing in some form for over 10 years.
Okay.
And I had probably a handful of, short story or nonfiction publications, and I was had a crappy second draft of a novel,
Yep.
and I wasn't really, I wasn't really anywhere. I certainly wasn't comfortable with my writing persona yet. And that was 10 years ago, where I've done a lot more since then, and I've come a lot more since then, and I personally feel very comfortable with that. I still think I have a long way to go, but I am not the type of person who looks at what I've achieved and says this isn't enough, or says I'm not doing this fast enough, or I'm not doing as much as I would like to be, or I'm not successful because I didn't do as much as I wanted to by this date or by this year.
Yep.
I Side tangent, but when I was probably 18, 19 or so, the Life in Hell comics that Matt Groening did before The Simpsons. I don't know if you've ever seen those with the rabbits, but in one of them, there's a sort of milestones of like growing up. And it's like first time shoplifting and first time getting bullied and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And one of them toward the end, the rabbit character Binky is looking in the mirror, and the caption is realization that you might not write the great American novel by the time you're 30. And when I saw that, I had never, it occurred to me that I would or wouldn't write the great American novel by 30. That just seemed like an arbitrary number to me. But after I did see that, I started to think about it more like, wow, like I could do that. I could be, the author who's publishing in his 20s. It's like, how long could it take, And I think I did reach a point, probably, when I was 29 or so, but when I realized, okay, I'm not going to write and publish the great American novel by the time I'm 30. When I was 30, I had an almost done novel draft that wasn't finished yet. And I think after 30 happened, I think I realized, wait a minute, that really is just an arbitrary number. It doesn't mean anything. It's not a significant milestone, and maybe even Matt Groening, he just kind of threw that in when he was drawing that comic. He needed to fill an extra panel for his
Yeah.
deadline that week or something. But I don't think that these sort of timetables, milestones mean as much as we think they do when we set them when we're very young.
That's a good point. Okay, that's a good point. And man, I wish I was like you. I wish I had like that attitude of like because man, I'm all about like hitting. There's no other area of my life that I attribute anything like that. Like there's no area of my life where I attribute like milestones or like needing to hit something except for this. Like this is the one thing where I'm like, yeah, no, I've got this stuff in my head that needs to happen. And you're right. It's unfortunate because all it does really is just create unnecessary sort of anguish, right? Because it doesn't matter. Like either it happens or it doesn't. You're wishing for it or you thinking it should happen is irrelevant to that process. Um,
Well, I do think, and again, thinking about this a little bit more as someone who doesn't have these kind of strict timelines, one advantage of these kind of timelines that we're talking about is that they can often motivate you to work faster, work smarter, work more efficiently, devote more time to this thing that you're trying to do. And they can, it's like, when you're in school and you have deadlines for things,
yeah.
it's like, if you didn't have that deadline, you might not get it done. Or deadlines can help us, keep us structured. Even in my adult life, I like think about things. Okay, I have to do this before this date, or else X. I think that the kind of deadlines or timelines that we're talking about can often serve as motivators for you,
Mm,
especially if you're the kind of person who needs that motivation. So if
yeah.
saying, okay, I want to do this by the time I'm 30, or by the time 10 years passes, or by, the end of this year, or something like that, sometimes that can keep you on track if you would, especially if you wouldn't have done it otherwise.
Yeah, if you are procrastinating, it definitely can be helpful. I agree, but there is that side that sort of neurotic side. Um, but so, do you think people should have some sort of deadline? Like, do you think people going into this journey should have some sort of exit plan or some sort of like thing where it's like, hey, at this point you should consider stopping, or do you think, hey, as long as you're having fun, just keep going regardless?
I think that, and again, I'll go back to what I originally said, that for me, giving up is not about what I have or haven't achieved, or
Okay.
what goals I have or haven't met. Giving up, quitting is about, okay, do I still want to continue doing this thing anymore?
Okay.
Do I still want to work towards this end goal? Because if the answer to that is yes, I'll work forever,
Okay.
till the rest of my life, till I'm a senior citizen working toward that goal. And that's the kind of person that I am.
Hmm.
That is what I would feel happy doing and what I would want to do. And I would continue to look myself in the mirror once a year, several times a year, and say, is this what you want to be doing? And if at any point in the future it didn't feel like what I wanted to be working towards anymore, and maybe if I just wanted to be doing something else more, then I think I could be honest with myself about that and say no. So I'm
Wow.
not going to do this anymore.
Okay. That's probably the best attitude to have. Like if anyone's listening to this, I would probably go with Ian's advice. Um, I myself am always like looking at like all right, the emotional cost to it, right? Like the time cost, right? This is time you're taking away from being with your wife, right? Even if it's only a couple hours a day, that's time you can hang out with your wife, right? Time you could do in other things, and so I'm always reassessing like the cost of it put into it and what needs to be come out as an outcome. I'll probably always write forever. I can't imagine me ever getting bored with writing, like in some fashion, even if I was to quit. But the actual path of staying on this journey to get to a certain goal, to get my work published, that I definitely still have some sort of time frame on, and I would still encourage people to try and put something on there. I would say if you're if you don't notice any progress, if you're getting, to that 10-year mark and you haven't seen anything, like, and I'm not like no progress, like straight rejections, you notice that your prose has never improved. You notice that like nothing seems to be getting better. Start to reconsider what needs to change. Maybe it's just the way you're doing it. If you're willing to reinvent your style of writing, reinvent what you're working on, awesome. But man, like it's a heavy cost to continue to go through this process and not get something in return for it eventually. And maybe ultimately you have to just accept that maybe nothing ever comes to you, and that if you're okay writing these books and no one ever sees them, you'd still be happy. Then yeah, then you're bulletproof. But in terms of pursuing this process, man, I think having a very wide set of years to at least get to a certain point is important. And then once you get there, so after my first 10 years as an example, right, I'm probably going to set another goal, maybe another 5 or 10, basically to get like a really good milestone. If not, maybe I'll stop. But yeah.
I think that is actually a very good way to be, because I've been reading more recently about this phenomenon of writers finishing a first book and then having a lot of trouble writing a second book.
Yeah.
Because, and part of the reason for that is because when you start the first book, you're all promise and excitement and like, yeah, I'm going to write a book, and you don't really know how difficult it's going to be. But then after you've been through that process once, it can be intimidating to start or really get into the second book, because you know how much work it takes to really, really do that. But on the flip side, I think that it's important to continuously keep setting goals for yourself. And a lot of writers talk about, okay, I want to get published. And then after you get published, then what? It's like, oh, I want to get an agent. If you want to get an agent, then what? The idea that, building a career as an author is about writing a lot. Unless you're Harper Lee, you're probably going to write more than one book. You're probably going to continue to engage. You're probably going to continue to develop yourself as a writer. And so I think that's why, for me, when I set goals, it's not just about one goal and finishing, it's about multiple goals and multiple steps that will get me to this future point where I have more of the author career that I want to have. And even when I have that author career, I'd still want to be developing it and moving more and more forward. So for me, I think it's the finish line never comes, but in a good way. If you can keep moving the finish line further and further away.
That's good. Okay. Excellent. So for those that are watching this, I hope this was helpful to you. Again, not the most pleasant of subjects, but it's something that needs to be discussed. And I hope this does reaffirm your desire to keep going along this process, or perhaps reconsider it. If you found it useful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. And with that, we will be back next week. I'm Josh Bresslin, and that's Ian M. Rogers.
Take it easy.